Hey friends, welcome back to Nosy AF, where we have conversations about art, activism, and social change. I'm your host and friend, Stephanie Graham, and I so much admire today's guest on the show, EbonyJanice. EbonyJanice is a superstar lady whose work blends activism, art, comedy, academia, and she does it with pure, unapologetic brilliance. EbonyJanice has authored several books, but the one framing today's conversation is All Black Girls Are Activists, a Fourth Wave Womanist Pursuit of Dreams as Radical Resistance. EbonyJanice is smooth as F. She is a womanist theologian, an educator, writer, and performer whose work is all about liberation, wholeness, and finding softness in a world that wants you, talking to you, hardened. And to that I say, absolutely not hardened. Me? Hardened? You? No, that's not going to fly. So from developing Fourth Wave Womanism to creating art that explores Black American women's journey toward healing and flight, EbonyJanice is here to drop wisdom, challenge norms, and most importantly, make us feel seen and heard. And to that I say, H-E double hockey sticks, yes. Am I right? I'm so happy EbonyJanice is here today. But first, theme song.
Gotta get up, tell the whole world you a winner. Vision of a far with a mission in the cause. What you doing, how you doing, what you doing, and who you are. Flex yourself, impress yourself. Check yourself, don't wreck yourself. If you know me, then you know that I be knowing what's up. Hey, Stephanie Graham is nosy as up.
EbonyJanice, thank you so much and welcome to Nosy AF.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm so thrilled. I was thinking that for my audience, who are majority of like artists and culture makers, if we could just sort of go together to define the principles of Fourth Wave Womanism.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So womanism is a socio-political, spiritual, religious tool that, or the way that I've defined it, that is used for justice making, that is used for wholeness making. And the term originally was coined by Alice Walker in her book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And it's written in prose. So it's this 4-part definition where she starts talking about how a womanist is, loves the moon, loves softness, loves, she doesn't say softness. That's just me throwing that in there, but loves the moon, loves roundness, loves dance, loves spirit. There's another part of the definition where she says, a daughter says to her mother, Mama, I'm going to Canada and I'm taking you and several other slaves with me. Another part of the definition, she says, womanist is like womanish, which is similar to like being too grown, knowing too much. And so she's really fleshing this out in this kind of poetic way, but she gets to the last part of the definition and she says, womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender. And so the way that I interpret that is that is Alice Walker's way of saying that womanism is Black women's feminist work, but it's a deeper shade of purple. It's the deeper feminist work. And because from what we know about her work and that she fleshed out both in the definition and onward, is that Alice Walker is suggesting that Black women's feminist work is not just what we knew at that time, as feminist work. It's not just about gender equality. It's really about wholeness. It's really about our roundness. It's really about our fullness as human beings. And so when I came to womanism, I came actually through womanist theology because these Black women theologians who are doing a lot of work learning with Dr. James Cone, who is considered the father of Black liberation theology. And so what the whole entire idea was saying that this sacred text that we know of as the Bible can't be the whole story because Blackness hasn't been fleshed out. And what Black liberation theologians were knowing is that God couldn't have forgotten us, right? God couldn't have forgotten Black people. Well, Black women theologians were seeing themselves certainly in Black liberation theology, but were offering at the same time, there's something else missing, and it is our unique identity as Black women who, that there's something that needs to be spoken to for our Black womanness, and that the naming woman or womanist really spoke to that a little bit more. The definition of womanism really spoke to that a little bit more. And so they coined this term, womanist theology. And so that's how I came to womanism. That's how I came to womanist theology, from this theological perspective or from this spiritual religious perspective. And so as I began to learn more about womanism and really find myself as, or already identifying as a womanist just without that naming, knowing that there was something very unique, both from my freedom making or my justice seeking self, and also from this spiritual religious being or this theologian, this person who is deeply invested in spirit and knowing more about God and understanding more about the divine and my relationship with the divine, that there has to be some unique language or some unique conversation that is had for me and that centers me. And so that's where I came into womanism. But along the way of learning and being, really identifying as a womanist and a womanist theologian, I realized that we were in another wave of womanism. And this particular wave of womanism was thinking about spirit making, spiritual work, thinking about justice making, thinking about identity making from this full perspective, and knowing that literally wellness couldn't be supplemental to the work, but that wellness, that our wholeness, that our softness, our pursuing our whole selves was literally the radical work. The most radical work that we could ever do was to really return to ourselves. And I identified it as another wave because I realized that there were a lot of other Black women and femme folk who were doing similar work, who were not just saying we're preaching from the pulpit or we're doing this activism work and this is a supplemental tool that we're using, but that we're literally saying, no, actually, the work that we're supposed to be doing is taking care of ourselves, is seeking ourselves, is pursuing ourselves. And the reality is, historically, Black women haven't had the privilege of centering ourselves in that way. Black femme folk haven't had the privilege or the right, and really in a lot of ways, the audacity to say, I'm going to take care of me first, and then, the rest. And the end of that kind of intro, defining that I really realized as a wave was that it wasn't just from this socio-political or from this academic perspective or from this theological perspective or even from this perspective of being in ministry. What really affirmed it was that the art that we were making as Black women and femme folk really even began to speak to that. See also Solange, Seat at the Table, really is a full womanist, a reclamation where she says, I'm going to go look for my body. I'll be back like real soon. And so there's something in that really was kind of like, if there was a mantra or a song or a theme song for what a fourth wave of womanism is, it really is Black women saying, I'm going to go look for my body. I'm gonna go look for me, myself, my wholeness, and then I'll be back to take care of everybody else if that's what I gotta come back to do. And or that I'm gonna go look for my body. I'll be back like real soon. And that being back, is when I get back, hopefully y'all be good. Or when I get back, there will be a lifting or there will be a stretching or there will be an enlarging that will happen just as a result of me going to get me and coming back.
This makes sense. Well, one thing I was thinking of listening to your book, I was like, wow, EbonyJanice knows a lot of people. I feel like I need to even get your book just so I can reference all the names. I was like, maybe this would be my art project, like making little zines of all these folks. But yeah, because I'm like, wow. But then it made me think your background, like, oh yeah, she did study theology. I feel like your writing, or at least like your reading, it's you narrating the book. You speak so easy, like a friend. And so you forget that you have this background. You just seem like you're a friend that's just like talking as if you're just talking as if we're like out working. I think of like in Forrest Gump, Bubba Gump, how he's just saying like, there's this kind of shrimp and that kind of shrimp. And you're like, and this Alice Walker, and then this theologian, and then this theologian. I'm like, wow, you really know.
I think another thing that's important in that too, though, Stephanie, is that what also I think you could recognize about, some of the people that I name dropped that really are the homies, or that really are people that I have been learning with or learning in community with, is that that's your circle too.
Yeah.
make and for whoever the listener is, that's your circle too, that you are either surrounded by and or should be surrounding yourself by people who are adding to the canon, who are thinking through the thoughts. And so it seems really like, oh my gosh, how does she know all these people? But either next year or 10 years from now or 15 years from now, we literally will be saying the same thing about, whoever the community of folk that you're in relationship with, because none of us are on an island by ourselves learning these
Yeah.
things, right? I'm learning in community with some brilliant people who 15, 20 years ago, when we first started really digging into these conversations, we was just ashy. Nobody knew who, nobody knew who 15, 20 years ago. I won't say nobody knew who Sonia Renee Taylor was, because she was well known in another arena. But then
Mm.
as her work began to shift and she's in relationship with all these other people, or we're in relationship, right? As her work began to shift, of course it impacts the things that I'm thinking about. So my friend who is not known on an international stage, I'm not known on an international stage, but we're growing and evolving in community together. So we arrive at this place at the same time, and it looks like, wait, how do they all know each other? Meanwhile, nobody knew us 27 minutes ago. And I'm done with this sermon too. But the other example that I give of that is, there's this famous picture, or I'll call it famous because I love it so much, but it's like Toni Morrison, Pearl Cledge, Alice Walker, June Jordan, everybody that you can think, that it just feels like a flex for them all to be in the same picture at the same time.
Yeah.
At the time of the photo, whoever was taking the photo or whoever was walking by at the time of the photo just thought, oh, it's a whole bunch of Black girls standing on the stairs. Nobody really, at the time that the photo was taken, could have looked into the future and been like, oh, the mothers of our wisdom are currently all in this one place taking a picture. They were just students. They were just, scholars. They were just teachers. And other than the homies, nobody knew them. And then now we can't even talk without, thinking about, at the very least one of them, or hopefully we not out here running off at the mouth and not thinking about, Maya and Tony and Alice and, and it seems like it would seem like a flex to mention them at that time now, but at the time, it's just like, oh, that's my girlfriend, Alice.
Yeah. I feel like I just knew whoever Oprah had on the show when my mom was getting me dressed for school is who I would know. So it would just be like Maya Angelou and maybe Toni Morrison. And like that would be it. I went to school, it was in like a predominantly white neighborhood, and then I went to film school. So it really wasn't until I started like pursuing my own art practice, running across like other Black artists, that I would know some of these other names. Otherwise, I had no idea who they were.
That's in that too, though, in my opinion. That's in that I'm gonna go look for my body. I'll be back like real soon. It's really like no one, because I'm from, Sandusky, Ohio, this predominantly white space. The curriculum was not thinking about any of the people that I just listed. Maybe the Blackest, and not that this isn't Black, but the Blackest portions of the curriculum was like maybe a Richard Wright book, Black boy. As far as Black women are concerned, Phyllis Wheatley,
Okay.
So I didn't grow up with a curriculum just steeped in, Black girl wisdom either. But when you be in the pursuit, which is the journey that, right, like obviously you're on right now, you're in the pursuit of yourself, you go on to look for your body. A part of the way that you find your body and put your members and put your pieces back together is you're like, oh, who is everybody talking about Audre Lorde? I need to find out something about Audre Lorde. Everybody's talking about June Jordan. Let me read something, let me find out. And then you discover that work and you're like, oh, I didn't know I was missing my eyes. I didn't know I was missing my fingers. I didn't know my hands weren't completely, doing what hands are capable of doing. And so, I think that that's a part of that. Like what we do when we go look for our body is we go and grab that material, or we go and grab the homies, or we go and, build community, with our sisters and our besties, and we figure out, how to stretch and enlarge ourselves in that way.
Yeah. So your art practice, is it something else outside of writing? Because in your book you mentioned, you talk about how you didn't know that Patrisse Cullors was an artist. I didn't either until you said that.
Yeah.
And then you had, and I might have like missed it because again, I was like listening, but your friends, you were at some event and your friends were like, we didn't even know that you were an artist. And I was wondering if you could talk about what that event was and how that
Yeah.
came about.
Yeah, I did this. Now, this actually is a little bit of a flex for the record. I
I
did
love a
this.
flex.
Yeah, just slight, I did this program several years ago, the Public Theater in New York City, um, which and it's called Bars, and it was run by Daveed Diggs, Tony and Grammy Award winning Daveed Diggs, who is,
Wow.
of course, Daveed Diggs is in Hamilton, the original cast of Hamilton, and so had this program where he had for a few years invited actors and poets and writers and performers into this kind of community theater-ish experience and spent the summer together really writing and, building up to this end project. And the end project was a lot of individual performances and then a lot of group performances. And so I call it a slight flex because I happened to apply to it. It was somebody sent me the application, and the day that it was due, I was like, "Oh, let me turn this little application in." I didn't really know details and specifics, what it was about to be. Submitted my little video, did my little thing, whatever, and got in. Then once I got in, I found out details and specifics, and I hadn't necessarily been a theater kid, so I didn't know how big of a deal, how important the public theater was. Viola Davis, Julia Roberts, Meryl Streep, like some of the
Yeah.
majors, had performed in this particular theater or through this theater. And so I spent the summer working on this project, and the performance that I did, so the solo performance that I did was solo, but it ended up kind of being group choreography. But the solo performance that I did was this piece that I wrote called The People Could Fly, which was
Mm.
about the actual historical story, the rebellion at Ebo Landing, where a group of enslaved Africans overthrew their captor off the coast of St. Simon's Island in Georgia. And then the legend is that they got over into the water, grabbed hands, and then flew back to Africa. And
Mm.
so I wrote this piece. Some of the homies came to see me perform, and when they showed up, they were just like, wait a minute. I know you as an educator. I know you as an activist. I know you, as somebody who be running off at the mouth. I did not know that you were a writer and a performer in this way. And that is a part of my upbringing, certainly, is that I used to write poetry. I used to perform in, when I was younger, in community theater and things like that. But it had really gotten away from me for so many years because I really got kind of accidentally caught up in the social justice industrial complex is what I call it, where
Mm.
all Black people, especially Black women and femmes, end up accidentally being in charge of equity and inclusion for everything. And we have to
Yeah.
teach all the things and educate on all the things. And I accidentally ended up in that. So some of these people that were having this kind of like shocked response came to know me because of that work. And even though we had known each other for years, I hadn't necessarily been posting poetry or posting any of my creative writing online. What I was
Mhm.
doing online was anti-racism education.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that was the surprise. But so that's the addition of my artist work, is that I am a poet and a playwright and a country music writer. I just sing the country songs to myself though.
Oh, really? Country music?
Literally just it is the EbonyJanice show, but I love country music so much. So shout out to Cowboy Carter for
Yes.
introducing, to a lot of people how like storied country music is, which I think is part of the reason why I love it so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously country music has been around forever, but hearing it like bumping down the block is like because of Cowboy Carter, I think
Yeah, yeah,
is
yeah.
amazing.
Like, okay, it's an era. We are
Getting
in
my
an era.
so into Carter, I just love. Do you still are you like working on anything right now that you're excited about it, like a play or anything?
Yeah, I have 3 things that I'm working on right now. have been working on a short film. It's called Meet Me in Harlem. It's basically a choose your own adventure love story, if you will. And it's about lifetimes worth of love for these two people fall in love with each other in Harlem. And then through their love, discover that they have multiple timelines and lifetimes. And so it's kind of choose your own adventure because it's not a linear story. So there's like at some point, like, choose your own adventure for those who might not know, because I'd be forgetting sometimes that I'm of a certain age. Choose your own adventure is where when we were younger, we used to get these books where you could get to like page 12 and it would be like, if you want Jane to go down the hill to get the ball, turn to page 37 to finish the story. If you want Jane to just sit on the hill and cry, turn to the next page and see. And so there's different ways that the story ends. And so that's kind of how this short film that I've been working on for a few years is that it's like there are moments where you're like, oh, they gonna make it. And there are moments where it's like, oh, they don't make it for a couple more lifetimes. And so, so I've been working on that. And I'm actually performing for the first time ever a comedy storytelling event. I
Cool.
I wrote this comedy script a couple years ago, or I started working on it a couple years ago, so I'll finally be performing it in October of this year in Brooklyn. But I wrote this piece because I realized that Black girls gotta be so serious, and I present very serious because of the work that I was doing publicly. Meanwhile, I don't know many people funnier than me. So given the chance to like actually choose the way that I show up, I probably would choose the clownery and the foolery and the cutting up. But I didn't feel like there was a space for that, and I wanted to figure out a way to introduce that. And also, I'm deeply socialized in a Southern Black Christian experience. So some of the things that I want to talk about felt very inappropriate. So I just kind of started working on this storytelling experience where I'm really telling a lot of true stories, embellished by comedy, of course, but telling a lot of these stories that I didn't know how I would tell it. And so the name of the special is called Who Gonna Tell My Family This? Because it's kind of like y'all didn't want to know this about me, but here we
Oh
are.
my God.
And then the other piece, which is kind of an ongoing project, I had this group of this kind of what you're talking about. Does EbonyJanice know everybody? I got together a group of the homies at the beginning of 2021, and for the next 2 and so years, I basically paid them every month to show up and talk to me about this idea of the people could fly, because I was so inspired by the piece that I ended up writing for Bars in at the Public Theater a few years ago. And I wanted to talk about it more. I wanted to talk about it more specifically with Black American women, because I feel like that's my tribe and we know something about flight that or we may know something about flight, but we just don't talk about our wings. We just don't talk about, our ability to fly. We don't talk about lost technology as, descendants of as African people, but as descendants of enslaved people who were socialized out of flight. And so myself, Sonia Renee Taylor, Khadija and Zakia Abdul-Mateen, Nikki Black, Thea Monier, Roya Marsh, and Lord, don't let me be forgetting anybody. Mahogany L. Brown. How could I be forgetting? We spent probably about 2.5 years, which culminated this January. I took them to Senegal to the door no return, and to really contemplate on a deeper level what it meant for us to fly, back to our homes. And but the purpose of that work was because once that group culminated after those 2 and so years, I have been working on this play now, which is it's a full-blown production. Really, these characters kind of fleshed out by this group of women over the last few years, thinking about what happened on that ship, what happened to God on that ship, on the way to St. Simon's Island. Before you overthrow your captors, how do you remember that you can fly? How do you remember, what do you understand about God? What happened to sisterhood? What happened to, what happened to God on that ship? So it's an Afrofuturistic womanist retelling of what happened, because the cast is solely women and girls. And so I've been working on those three, thinking, imagining, and dreaming about how I will bring them into the world for a few years now. And what a privilege and an honor to be able to be like, I'm not going to put this out tomorrow because guess what? It's not ready.
Yeah.
But, come to the time where now it feels time, like I can do the comedy script and, hopefully we'll see what happens with the other 2 projects in the future.
Yeah, that's really exciting, especially as you were saying in your book where you're like, okay, I need to get out of this space, like out of teaching. I mean, we're just talking about this on your
Mhm.
Instagram. You're like, you guys need this workshop, but I'm not going to do it again. And I can relate to that. Like I've had friends that have started to become producers because they're like, oh, nobody's hiring us to produce. So
Uh-huh.
clearly I have to become the producer, and like that's not something they want to do, but
Right,
it's
right.
like you
Mhm.
do it because nobody else is going to do it. Like if we need more department heads in film of color, then they become a department head of color, where you're just
Uh-huh.
like, I really just want to be a worker and just do my job and go home, but you're not allowed that
Yeah, it's the
opportunity.
difference between the things that we do because we sick and tired of being sick and tired, word to
Yeah.
Fannie Lou Hamer, and the things that we would really do if we could really dream, if we could really
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, in my highest imagination, this is what I would be doing." And the gag is we're so deeply socialized into certain behaviors and, being the mule of the world and taking care of everything and everybody else. We're so socialized into those ideas that even when you first start asking people, what would you do in your wildest imagination and your wildest dreams, there's such a disconnect. It still ends up being labor, right?
Mhm.
In this capitalist society. There's still some labor to it. And so it takes a couple tries to get to like, actually, even if there were no limits or boundaries, I wouldn't be doing that. This is what I actually would be doing. And so I say, a privilege, but it doesn't I really have been troubling the language of privilege, particularly as an artist, as a writer, as a creative that's been able to kind of ease into certain things and not have to be like mass producing stuff so that I can pay my bills. But the
Yeah.
reality is it's not a privilege, it is our divine right. It is actually you were born, divinely equipped and with the right to do the things that the what Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon calls the work your soul must have. But we haven't historically been able to even access that enough to the point that when we see people access it, we're like, oh, that's privilege. It
Yeah.
is. Got it in the context of what we're experiencing. But really, it's not privilege, it's your right. Like that's how it's
Yeah.
supposed to be. And, I think that it takes a lot of that. That is some of what Fourth Wave Womanism wants to support us through is that we don't have to feel guilty about or, give all these disclaimers before we say, oh, what I was doing today was napping. What I was doing today was creating something. What I was doing today was, hanging out with the friends. What I was doing today was experiencing pleasure. But especially for Black women, we always feel like we got to give all these disclaimers about what we were doing today. What I was doing today was reading romance novels, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that must be nice. Actually, it is. And I hope that, I want that for you too. And it is your divine right. So what is the work that we can do together to figure out how to get all of us to that place, where we can be in our must be nice era.
Yes, must be nice era. Because I think about in church when, the pastor would say, when we get to heaven, we want God to be like, good job.
Yeah.
You don't want him to be like, listen, you were doing all this ripping and running, and I wanted you to be a country western singer, but
Right,
you're
right,
like
right.
goofing off running a workshop.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Factually. Factually, factually, factually.
Hey, it's Stephanie. Just cutting into today's conversation real quick because so much of what EbonyJanice is talking about is around softness. And if you're about that soft life like us, you got to check out the Soft Style pin by my company, Graham Cracker Pin. It's a 1-inch glittery little emblem of ease and joy, gold metal, vibrant colors, all the chill vibes, and you can wear it as a reminder to yourself, a statement to those who step to you, and an invitation for those around you to step into the soft life too. Free shipping in the USA, and you can find it now on the store at nosyaf.com because honestly, softness is our new lifestyle. This also makes me think when you hear, some of the women you mentioned, I'm still like learning more, but I think like in that space of like, pardon my like valley girl about it, but like black girl, intellectual,
Uh-huh.
womanist
Yeah.
world,
Mhm.
if they speak like spirit, God. And because like if I go to church on Sunday, that's not mentioned. You
Mhm.
think like, well, what they're speaking, that's not of God. And so that's
Mhm.
actually, I should not actually follow what they're
Uh-huh.
saying because it's not in the word, but actually it's making me even think like you just need further learning, right? Like it's like even how you were saying like this, like God doesn't necessarily, like in the Bible, it's not necessarily mentioned like what Black people were doing.
Mhm.
So good to, it's not like against God to read these works, I guess is what I'm
I
getting at.
I talk about this a little bit in the book in the chapter In Pursuit of My Ancestors,
Okay.
because I'm acknowledging that, growing I have been preaching from the pulpit since I was 8 years old, teaching Sunday school
Mm-hmm.
since I was 6. I grew up, like I said, deeply socialized into Southern Black Christianity, which is the Christianity that most of us are socialized into, even if you didn't grow up in the South. The Great Migration, took those Southern Black Christian ethics across the land.
Yeah.
So there definitely is, that is a part of who I am and who I have always been, and to be honest, who I will always be, no
Yeah.
matter what my actual identification is, or as far as like my theology, right? Because my theology has drastically shifted. But no matter what, I'm still Southern Black Christian girl at the core. And so I have to process how, and I say socialized into that because socialization is that you hear something and or you see something and something is repeated to you over and over again as the standard or as the ethic or as these are morals. And so you didn't necessarily get to contribute to the rules or the morals that were going to abide in. There was a hierarchy that already exists. You were born into it and you leaned into it and you live into it. And so some of what we consider demonic or antichrist or not of God or, against Christianity or against our principles. The reality is we really just haven't fleshed out our faith for ourselves. And that's just a
Yeah.
fact. And I'm going to tell you that as someone, again, who had been preaching and teaching from the pulpit since I was 8, that I was in my late 20s before I realized that I had never fully fleshed out my faith for myself. I knew what I believed, but I never interrogated why I believed those things. And the why I believe those things is equally as important as what I believe. So what happens is you hear somebody say, talk about ancestral veneration, and your automatic response to it, particularly from this Christian perspective or the Southern Black Christian experience, is that's demonic. We
Mm-hmm.
don't be fooling with no ancestors. Let the ancestors, we talking about God, we talking about Jesus, we talking about the Holy Ghost, and that's it. Meanwhile, the Bible sat there for more than one book, more than one chapter, and says such and such begat such and such begat such and such begat such and such for a mother effing reason.
Yeah.
Because lineage matters. Ancestry
Mm.
matters. It matters both from a political and a spiritual perspective. Why does the lineage of Jesus Christ matter? Why is such and such begat such and such begat such and such begat Jesus matter? Because from a legal perspective, we need to prove that Jesus is from a certain line so that we know that the Messiah has arrived. That's number
Mm.
one. That's why we're going through all of this such and such begat such and such, because we need to prove that Jesus is the Messiah. Number two, from a spiritual perspective, then it's also for a very similar reason, right? This legal perspective is also part of the ways that Jewish people are acknowledging or claiming their inheritance because of this fleshed out such and such begat such and such, right? And so this from this spiritual perspective, again, we get to the Messiah has arrived because we know that according to the text, the Messiah is going to come through this bloodline. For African and descendant people, right? There is no, particularly in the US, or those who have been taken from the continent of Africa and are descendants of those that were taken from this continent. There is really no way to do that, right? So
Mm.
legally, you cannot even claim your actual legal inheritance to a certain extent because there's no way to do it. Your history has been erased. There's no way
Mm.
for most of us, we can't go past Medea. We can't go past grandma or great grandmother, maybe great great grandmother,
Yeah.
depending on how
Yeah.
old you are, right? And so let's acknowledge that there's something intentional and insidious and systematic about Black people who happen to be largely Christian on this continent, who also are the direct descendants of enslaved Africans, who absolutely deserve the inheritance of wherever it is that they're from and the inheritance of this land. So legally, if you believe that it is demonic to acknowledge your ancestors in an intentional way, if reparations ever became a thing, you couldn't get them, because talking about anybody past the people alive has been demonized so deeply that you wouldn't even be able to say, no, I can prove this. So that's from a
Mm.
legal perspective. But from a spiritual perspective, how audacious is it to say, particularly African people, who are those of us that are the descendants of enslaved Africans, how amazing is it that we have been so socialized into believing that it is demonic to think, to reverence, to acknowledge, to honor, to think with, in high esteem about our ancestors, when the words coming out of your mouth are not even brilliant without your ancestors.
Yeah.
A large majority of the things that I say are not brilliant because EbonyJanice is brilliant. I've cited at least 10 Black women in the past 20 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So citation then, right, becomes a part of my spiritual and intellectual lineage. And of the 10 Black women that I've cited like 7 non-alive, 7 that are not alive. Those, if I considered them my ancestors, and I certainly do, those, if I considered them my ancestors, I'm brilliant because my ancestors were brilliant. So the
Yeah.
idea that I could show up and even talk about something with wisdom, with credibility, with authority, without reverencing or acknowledging the elders and the ancestors is laughable, right? So I put those two things together to talk about the legal and the spiritual reasons and implications of thinking about something other than specifically what came directly from Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus, is to suggest that there is an inheritance and a legal right that we have to that will not come through that text, because that text was not thinking about African people. That text was, and the text was thinking about African people, but the way that we've been socialized into learning about it was not thinking about African people, right? The way that we've been socialized into learning this text. And again, this is from a trained theologian. I went to seminary and I've
Yeah.
studied from, multi-faith perspective. I understand the text as something more than just the text, right? The Bible is still a sacred text that I am in intimate relationship with. And as a theologian, I have the ability to read this text and trouble it and say, oh, Zan West, queer theologian Zan West says, when we read sacred text in particular, we have to ask ourselves the question, who does it benefit for me to believe it this way? As a
Mm-hmm.
Black femme-bodied person, who does it benefit for me to believe that it is okay for Tamar's rape to be taken over by her father's grief that his son was killed? Who does it
Yeah.
benefit for me to believe that the most important part of that story is not the fact that Tamar was raped? The most important part of that story is the fact that a brother had to kill another brother, and now the dad is grieved about that.
Mm.
Who does it
Yeah.
benefit, right? So I understand then I don't throw away the story that
Yeah.
happened there. I understand that somebody made some choices when they wrote this story. Somebody made some choices when they preached this text or not, right? Somebody made some choices, and those choices, it does not benefit me in this body, in this lived experience, to believe that God cared more about one of those
Mm-hmm.
experiences than this other experience. And if you're socialized into believing your theological truth system in one way, who is erased more often? Women, surely. God is always mad at the women folk, always
Yeah.
judging, always punishing, always, condemning, right? Women, queer people, right?
Yeah.
Certainly God hates them, although
Yeah.
the text would not actually suggest that, right? And so you look at the least of these and you see the least of these are not represented in this text. That doesn't mean we throw the text away. That means that we have the divine right to say we get to ask some questions about who's left out here. And because this is the end of that sermon, because we don't have the historical records to say such and such begat such and such begat such and such begat such and such, we can look at this text and see that who begat who begat who begat who is important. Therefore, we shouldn't be excluding that from our reality at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, that's good. It's like doing more research and also put some respect on my great grandma's name.
Period. Because here's the
Yeah.
question in that. Do you ever think about potential children that will come beyond you, whether you have children out of your body or not? Do you think about your nieces and your nephews? Do you think about the future for them? If you in all your infinite wisdom are thinking about the future, you think your grandmother wasn't thinking about you? You think your great grandmother wasn't thinking about you? You think nobody in the past, even those that were enslaved, right? And in this brutal condition, that they
Yeah.
didn't look into the future and think, ooh, EbonyJanice, I want her to be well. I want her to be able to sit down somewhere. I don't want her to be talking about the same things that I'm over here talking about and struggling through.
Yeah.
And so there's
Yeah.
something very audacious about thinking that you can exclude your ancestors or that it's demonic. There's
Yeah.
something insidious about that idea, but that is demonic for you to be thinking about them. Meanwhile, you ain't even wise without them.
Right. It's almost sort of offensive. Like, don't be calling my grandma a devil.
1,000 trillion% offensive.
Yes. Yes. My goodness. That's really helpful. And thank you. Yeah.
Mm.
And, especially like when you go through, like, this is really helping me to like see, like, oh, yeah, read more, study more, be in more conversation. Because the girls I kick it with, we're not talking about this. Wait till I get to dinner tonight. Wait till I get to dinner tonight.
What is we
Yeah.
talking about?
Something else I want to ask you as you write about like ease and play and softness, what does that look like in practical? So you wake up in the morning, your alarm goes off, and then what do we do?
Number one, I don't wake up with an alarm. So let's start
Okay.
there. And I just want to say that I have lived my life to get to the point where I don't have to wake up with an alarm, because the way that my brain, I'll talk about softness in a second, and so I'll talk about a regulating nervous system. But the way that my brain functions is that if I'm startled out of my sleep, it's not going to be a great day. And I don't think that's just the EbonyJanice show. I think that we just get used to it, get used to waking up like this. And then, what happens in the day as a result of this. And this actually isn't new for me. When I was a little girl, I've been putting a lot of pieces together for myself about like, girl, how did you get this way? But when I was a little girl, when I was a teenager, my dad used to come wake me up because that was my preference. Because when my mom woke me up, my mom would just yell up the stairs, Abby, wake up, like.
Yeah.
But my dad, which is so funny because my dad can be so hard sometimes, my dad never shouted, woke me up. Ever, never, ever. My dad would come upstairs and like kind of like shake my shoulder a little bit and wake me up. And if I gotta be awakened by anybody but God, wake me up like that. Let me ease into the wake up. Do not jumpstart my day. And so then, of course, I have had, a few jobs in my early 20s before I really dove into entrepreneurship in the way that I exist in it now. But a few jobs in my early 20s where I did have to wake up really early with an alarm. And just the sound of it, I had to wake up with an alarm. It's just traumatizing. Like, it's like, yeah, I woke up alarmed. And so I think that that's important to think about, how we wake up. I don't want to say that I had a full intellectual thought process about it, but even then my desire was, I don't want to live a life where I got to wake up like this.
Yeah.
I recognize how this makes my body feel, and it doesn't feel good. And, and you notice the difference because on the days where you don't have to set an alarm, it's a completely different kind of morning. And so that became a dream for me, which seems like a silly thing to say, but it's a really real thing that, in my highest imagination for myself, I live my life in such a way that I wake up and then I ease into my day because I don't want to wake up with an alarm or alarmed. And so I begun to create a life where that was possible for me. Now, for the record, I wake up really early anyway, so there's that. But I wake up because I woke up, not because somebody punched me in the head and said, "Get up," you know. And so that's kind of where some of that messaging comes from, and some of that language of ease is really like, oh, if I could ease into my day, what other ways do I get to practice ease in other spaces? It's not just, I don't want to wake up really harsh with an alarm. I also don't want to start my day with, terrible text message news or terrible email news, right? And so you just start to look throughout the rest of your day and see where are the places where the most high stress, or where you're less in your body or the least in your body, and or where you're feeling the most anxiety, or where you have a knot in your stomach, or where you're feeling overwhelmed. And if you could kind of look at those parts of your day and figure out what is the strategy that I could implement for myself, for my life, that I could avoid this high kind of kick to my gut, kick to my nervous system. And again, there's a way in which we could talk about privilege when it comes to that. But I want to really, at the very least, offer that it actually is your divine right to be in a regulating nervous system. That it does not have to be normal that your body should constantly be in a state of alarm and unrest. And so looking at those places in your life where it's like, okay, instead of checking my email or my text messages as soon as I wake up, and there's not privilege in that. That's just kind of wisdom. Go to the bathroom and brush your teeth first at first, right?
Yeah.
Go get some water. Go take a shower. Be with yourself before you do those things. To think of that as like, oh, that's a privilege. Yeah, I have to jump out the bed and check my emails, check my phone. What kind of salary are you making that as soon as you wake up, you gotta go check your email? Quit that job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So thinking of it that way, instead of leaning into like, oh, people who don't have to check their text messages or their emails as soon as they wake up have the privilege of doing that. And start to think about it from this perspective of like, who really is I say this and I'm done with the sermon. I'm a Baptist preacher by heart, so I always
I love how you conclude everything as sermons.
my mom used to say to me, because I sleep with the do not disturb on, and my mom used to be like, what if there's an emergency? Call the police, please. Please, if an emergency is happening for you, call the rescue squad. You know, there has to be, especially before we lived in the same place, and we've only lived in the same place in my adult life for the past few years. So the years before now, where she would be like, what if there's an emergency? Nobody can get you. Call the daughter that's around the corner.
Yeah.
Don't call me in Harlem and you're in North Carolina. Doesn't make sense. Like there has to be, I cannot be at the top of the list of the people that you call in the event of an emergency, because I'm gonna be asleep. Now, of course, even with Do Not Disturb, there's ways to get through
Of
that.
course.
So if
Yeah,
there
of
is a
course.
real emergency, I might hear the phone vibrating.
Yeah.
But otherwise, so this idea, like, again, it's more of our socialization. We really have been, trained, for lack of better words, socialized into this idea that we always have to be accessible. And that goes back to Solange saying, I'm gonna go look for my body. In going to look for my body, a part of getting my body back is getting my nights back, getting my sleep back, getting my morning back, getting my lunchtime back. My lunchtime, if I have to go to a place to work, my lunchtime, the company that you work for has a legal obligation to provide you with a break. Take the actual break. It is not a privilege to take the break. It is your legal right to have the break, right?
Yes.
And so thinking of those things really helped me to begin to really construct and co-create what ease will look like for me. And then once you can really start to lean into the ease, then you can really start to think more deeply about, okay, I've eased into my day. What will bring me pleasure? And that is not a privileged thing either. I'm not a coffee drinker. I'm not a coffee snob like some people. I do drink coffee, but I'm not a coffee snob like some people. So I get the like $4 instant coffee, and if I put any money into my coffee routine, it is my creamer. I'll buy a really good, oat creamer.
Come on
And
now.
so I make my little coffee in the morning. That's my little morning routine. And this is before I let y'all stress me out. Like,
Yeah.
let me wake up, go brush my teeth, go do the thing, go da 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 da, go downstairs, do my little coffee routine. And more than it is the coffee, it's really the ritual of it. I really enjoy, like, now I'm now waiting for the kettle to, start whistling. And while I'm doing that, I go read my little, ancestor said book, my little, daily word, whatever, whatever. And so
Yeah.
that brings me pleasure. And so I can think more about, I've gotten to the ease. I'm thinking now more about pleasure, how to fill those places that used to be more high stress. I can fill those now with, like, this is what I actually want to be doing in this moment, or what I actually want to be experiencing in this moment. And
Yeah.
and softness is like this whole other conversation, I think, even though it's inside of that too, right? If I'm talking about a regulating nervous system, when I talk about softness, particularly in the book, but as I, kind of start to introduce the language of softness several years ago in this way, I've never been talking about softness as luxury or as like
Yeah.
an aesthetic. Ever, never, ever. I've always been talking about softness as I am seated in my body.
Peace.
And you know the difference between your seat and when you are up in, right? Like
Yeah.
it, and a lot of us live like right here at the, like, clenched fist and
Yeah.
the tightened chest and, belly. And I discovered a softer version of myself, a fully, like, just sit back. If you're, listening to this, just sit back in your seat, fully relax your shoulders, release, the breath that might be sitting in your chest, release, feel into the breath in your belly, and feel what it feels like to be fully seated, relaxed into your seat. Now
Mm-hmm.
imagine that you could live your life from that seat, or that you could pursue that seat in every single situation. That is what I've always been talking about when I talk about softness, when I talk about pursuing softness, pursuing this easeful, seated self. Even in the example that I give is Toni Morrison, that doesn't mean that we cannot have hard conversations, because
Yeah.
we've seen too many Toni Morrison interviews where she talking about hard stuff
Yeah.
fully seated, meaning you saying something she told a woman, in fact, in this particular interview, you can't even imagine how incredibly racist what you just said to me is.
Yes, I
And
remember
Toni
that.
Morrison said that to a white woman, fully seated in herself, which is
Yeah.
part of the reason why I call it the seat of Toni.
Yeah.
Fully seated in herself, saying hard things, fully seated. What does your body feel like at the end of a week, at the end of a month, at the end of a year, if you have practiced, even if you just practicing it, even if you haven't mastered it? And I don't think any of us will, because we live in a society where people are being genocided as we speak. So of course your body, is responding to the things going on around you, right? But if you just begin to practice it, and you
Yeah.
just sat in your seat 1 out of the 5 times you had to turn up today, and you practice that until that turns into 2 times, until that turns into 4 times. Get to the
Yeah.
end of the year and go back to the doctor and ask the doctor to reevaluate your blood pressure, reevaluate right? So I'm suggesting that it isn't just this spiritual woo-woo idea of the seat of yourself or fully seated in yourself. I'm suggesting that there is something that happens to your whole spirit, soul, and body when you can sit down in yourself on a daily basis, and there's something healing, something regenerative, something that is, revelatory in the seat that we haven't been able to get because we've been sitting up here ready to go. Who
Yeah.
I'm doing with the
Okay,
access
right.
I got my fist up. We ready
Oh,
to go.
right.
Sit back.
You know what? This is sort of terrible, but it sort of reminds me of this, like, seated, being soft is like gangsters. Like, I was watching this movie with Pablo Escobar. He's a
Weird.
terrible person, but he just moved through, just like, what did they say? Okay, I'm going to go deal with them. And he just walks, and he seems like very calm. Now, clearly we don't know his blood pressure or what, like, internally he was going through, but the way, at least in the movies, how he moved through was just so at peace.
I think that's a
Like,
brilliant description. I think that's a
yes.
brilliant connection, because when you think about who you could be as a leader or as an entrepreneur or as a creator, if you could sit down and because being in your seat means that you're less reactionary and you're more like, here's the chaotic thing that's happening. You in your seat and you're like, this is what's next. This makes me think about
Frank Lucas. We could say Frank Lucas for a black.
yes. Yeah, I mean, also maybe not the best person
Yeah, yeah.
ethically, but yeah, like
Right.
my Aunt Phyllis used to be a high-ranking official. She worked for National Guard Equal Opportunities Bureau. And I remember this like it was yesterday. I was like 23 years old. I went to DC with her for this convention and we're in the hotel and she's on the phone with a lot of like 5-star generals, like high ranking. She the only woman, the only black woman on this, only woman period, but particularly that she's a black woman on this call with all these generals, like high-ranking military officials. And they're asking questions. She's answering these questions. And somebody asked this question and she responds to them and she says, I know he's high-ranking because she says his title when she, Lieutenant Colonel something, whatever. She says his title, some big title. And he asked her the question and she says, let me think about that. And I'm in my early 20s. And at the time, I still believed that the way to prove that you were a good, best for this job or, that you were smart is that you're witty. You have the answer. But to see this Black woman in action say, let me think about that, change the trajectory of my life. Because here's the thing that taught me. She did not get a whooping with a belt. She didn't get fired. She didn't get in trouble. There's something, in fact, that I think they respected even more about her as a result of her saying, I'm not about to sit here and lie to you off the top of my head. I don't know. Let me think about that. There's something so profound in. So the example that you gave about, Pablo Escobar or Frank Lucas is like, just chilling. What multitudes of issues do you get to solve in your mind when you're fully seated versus trying to come up with the first possible answer? And how do we then apply that to all these other areas of our life where it's like, if I could sit down for a minute, I could figure this thing out. So let's take that sit down for a minute and apply it to our actual life. If I could stay sitting down, game changer. Overall, my whole spirit, soul, and body gets to have a different experience in this world if I could just stay seated.
That's really good. And I even remember when I was, learning like photography, and if people would ask me, oh, can you do photography for me? After I get all the information about like the who, what, where, I'm like, okay, this sounds great. I will call you back, like, so that way you can like really think of like a price, just like take your time instead of being like, it's 600. Oh, and then like you think back, like, why'd I say that? Like, it's really 800, 900. Yeah. So I really appreciate that. That's really good. Yeah. Thank you so much. Like this little quick round house questions. Okay. So did you have an imaginary friend growing up?
Oh, yes, I had an imaginary friend. My imaginary friend had an imaginary friend, and I had imaginary pets. I still remember their names. Teresa, Vanessa. My imaginary pet name was Dog. My imaginary cat's name was Cat. My imaginary bird's name was Birdie, and my imaginary giraffe's name was Giraffe. Not very creative, but very creative at the same time.
I love that. Do you have a favorite holiday food?
The first thing that just came to my mind is dressing.
Okay. And then do you have a favorite Christmas carol?
I don't. Well, maybe I do. What is that?
Yes. Hark all the bells.
All the bells. Yeah. I don't even know the words,
Yeah.
but something about that song is just like, oh, that's Merry, 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 Merry Christmas.
Yes. That's a good one. I've been like watching, I love like Hallmark films. And then this is a controversial one, but do you have your own Netflix account or do you use someone else's?
I don't watch anything at all whatsoever, period.
Really? Wow. Oh my God. I cannot wait to see your films.
Yeah, I don't watch anything. It's been a couple years since I really been like watching anything. I'm a romance novel girl and the storyline is so muchy that nothing can capture my attention as much anymore.
And then as a hip hop womanist, can you freestyle? Got bars?
I do. I will not.
Okay. And then have you ever won a contest?
I can't think. I'm sure I have, but the first thing that I thought with that question is I was the first person to get out in 6th grade for the spelling bee. So I was put out for the word magazine too. I'm very embarrassed about that, but that's the first thing that came to my mind.
Oh, don't be embarrassed. You wouldn't just, enjoyed was seated. Do you have a favorite Disney character?
I don't think that I do. Of course, Princess Tiana comes to my mind.
Yes,
and
of
then
course.
Mama
That's
Odie,
true.
of course, comes to my mind because I'm a little bit of Mama Odie sometimes. So I'll go with Tiana and Mama Odie.
And then last thing, do you have any hot takes through your womanist lens of the housewives? Like Atlanta housewives?
Everybody needs
Anything about them?
Yeah, all of them need to read All the Black Girls Are Activists.
Yes.
Well, number one, I do want to affirm that there's a chapter called In Pursuit of Loudness. So I don't want to judge the way that they show up because I think that there's something very valid about it. And also, I think In Pursuit of Softness would be very helpful for them, not from an aesthetic perspective, but from a they never sitting down. They always responding out their seats. So
man, that's real. You're right. That's so true.
Who would you be if you did not respond on TV out of your seat every single episode? Who would you be? And what's possible there?
There's a young lady, her Instagram handle is Queens of Production. She applied for your archivist position.
Okay.
She's a producer, like a film producer. And one, I think that'd be cool just for your films. But then two, I almost want to ask her if we can do it'd be like a fun 6-week Ayanla Dream With Me workshop with just Kenya Moore. With Portia Williams. I don't know.
Just pulling together those clips and thinking about what would you say to people instead of what Ayanla would say, because Ayanla might cuss them out, honestly.
Yeah.
What would I say to Kenya in this situation? What would I say to Portia in this situation? What would I say to Nene in this situation? I think that could be really, really dope. Yeah.
I think that I was saying that Ayanla because you had is a way to work with you, depending on your vibe, you would meet them in your home. So that's where I got the one-on-one thing, but I don't know. Just a thought. I was just wondering as I was reading, because I love The Housewife.
Please say this to me in an email soon, because I want to think about what that might look like.
I think I would just love it. And I think just where, you come from, I'm coming from housewives and drug dealers as my references. Yeah, I know. It's it takes all kinds, right? But yeah, I just would be, I feel like I would also learn a lot from that. So yeah, I'll send you an email about it and ask.
Please do. I want to think about that.
Yeah.
This has been another episode of Nosy AF. I'm your host, Stephanie Graham. What did you think about today's conversation? I would love to hear your thoughts. Head over to the Nosy AF website for all the show notes related to this episode. You can also find me on Instagram at Stephanie Graham. What would you know? Or online at missgraham.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter where I share exclusive updates about my studio practice as well as this podcast. Until next time, y'all, stay curious and take care. Bye.